Hello, good morning. I hope you can hear us now.
Barbara, can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me also? Yes. Now
I
everyone can
think a
hear.
lot of. Okay,
Yes.
great.
Okay. So we will start again. Thank you very much for joining the webinar. I see we have a lot of people from all over Europe joining us today, but we have also people from the Philippines, and we have actually Marie, one of our presenters today, joining us from Kenya. Marie, I will just ask you to please turn off your audio for a while. And please feel free to write any questions and to write any questions you have and any ideas in the chat box and to interact with the other participants. Meanwhile, I wish you a happy European Day of Parks. So today we are celebrating the diversity, the natural and cultural diversity in our European protected areas. And there are several hundreds of activities going on all over Europe. You have now started to answer a short questionnaire that I've put on for you, just to know your knowledge about protected areas in Europe. So, when was the first national park established and where was it established? So, I'm collecting your votes. And meanwhile, let me just add that this is a great pleasure to be together with Panorama Solutions organizing a webinar. Both EUROPARC and Panorama have started their own programs last year, and this time, for the 24th of May, we decided to come together to share with you solutions from the two corners of Europe. So today we will be hearing a solution from Portugal and a solution from Armenia. For those who are facing issues on the volume, we highly advise you to use a headset. Anyway, I will try to increase a bit my volume so maybe you can hear me better now. Okay, so thank you very much for your answers. I'm very satisfied with the results. So yes, the majority said that the first national parks were created in 1909, and this is correct. However, not everyone guessed where was it created. So the first national parks in Europe were created in Sweden in 1909. And this is the reason why we celebrate European Day of Parks on the 24th of May. Actually, it was not only one park, but two parks. The second national parks created in Europe were created in Switzerland. So half of you also guessed that. So congratulations. Meanwhile, the European Day of Parks was launched by the European Federation in 1990. And the idea is to connect people to nature. So we invite all protected areas across Europe to organize their events, to call their community to parks, and to provide a memorable experience in nature, but also to highlight the important role of our protected areas. This year especially, we are celebrating the European Year of Cultural Heritage. You probably know that the European Commission designated 2018 as the year to protect our cultural heritage. So we have challenged our members across Europe to organize events that can highlight the connection between nature and culture. We have produced tools in 25 languages, and we have over 200 events in and around being organized in and around today and the next coming weeks. And you can see in the map, we even have events out of Europe. We have an event in Israel, and we have also an event in Guadeloupe that belongs to France. Okay, for those who are facing sound problems, maybe what we always advise is to use a headset and to check if your volume is on. That's also very important. Meanwhile, the parks all over Europe are organizing all kinds of activities, from guided tours to seminars, fairs, exhibitions, and many of them are organizing activities with schools. So if you want to know more about European Day of Parks and eventually find an event close to you this weekend, you can check it online under europark.org/European Day of Parks. Okay, and this is also a very important week for all protected areas in Europe. On the 21st of May, we have celebrated the Natura 2000, and the day after the International Day of Biological Diversity. Meanwhile, it's also going on in Brussels at the same time, the European Green Week. It's a series of events organized by the European Commission that are taking place to discuss this year how our green cities can provide us a greener. Meanwhile, just let me give you a short overview of the EUROPARC Federation for those who don't know it. The EUROPARC Federation is the largest organization of protected areas in Europe, and our aim is to support parks protecting nature. And we do this by bringing people together. So our webinars are actually an excellent opportunity to bring technicians together and to discuss on a specific topic. So we are present in, our members represent national, regional nature parks, marine protected areas from all over Europe. And we try to make sustainable nature valued by people. So we have started our EUROPARC webinar series a year ago. All webinar recordings are available, and you can download them under europarc.org/EUROPARC-webinars. Also, the recordings and the presentations of today will be available online. So today we will have a short introduction by Marie Fishborn. She will give us an idea of what the Panorama Solutions is about. And then we'll hear two practical solutions from Portugal and from Armenia. It is very important that throughout the presentations you use the chat box to refer your questions either to Assina or to Eva, the presenters today. Because in the end of the presentations, we'll have a short debate to exchange ideas and we will try to answer all your questions. So I wish you a very productive webinar, and I will give now the floor to Marie Fishborn. Marie is the coordinator of the Panorama Solutions for a Healthy Planet initiative. And she has a long career in conservation. So she has been working in several projects all over the world, and now she's focused on creating and sharing solutions. So Marie, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. It seems everyone can hear me. Thank you for confirming. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome from my side as well. I actually work for IUCN, the International Union Conservation of Nature, and Panorama Solutions for a Healthy Planet is a joint initiative which we implement with a range of partners. I'm going to give you a brief overview of what Panorama really is before we move into the two really interesting case studies. So I mentioned this is a partnership initiative, and the aim behind Panorama is to facilitate learning from success in conservation and sustainable natural resource use. Through Panorama, we collate, document, and share solutions, specific examples that showcase how nature conservation can benefit society. And it is about giving recognition and visibility to approaches, organizations, and people that are successful and that have developed such solutions, but also to support the broader application of these successes. So the so-called solution providers can increase the leverage and impact of their work, and also they gain visibility through being promoted as part of this global initiative. But they also go through a process of self-reflection and self-learning through the structured case study format that we have developed. The so-called solution seekers can benefit from Panorama by avoiding to reinvent the wheel, for example, when designing new projects or conservation initiatives. But this is also just a source of inspiring stories, for example, for journalists. We also see the solutions potentially informing research and analysis of conservation approaches in a particular region, for example, and informing policy and helping to understand trends. So one unique aspect of Panorama, because there are a lot of case study platforms and initiatives out there, but one thing that is probably unique about what we do is this case study format, which is really focused on replicability. So we ask the solution providers to identify and describe the core components that make this approach, or BB here in the diagram. It can be more or less than 4, so this is just an example. But it's really about drilling down to the essence of which activities, which parts of the project or the initiative made all the difference. And we look for the common elements that constitute success in these case studies. So these can be things like involving all relevant stakeholders that should be consulted in managing a particular protected area, or setting up a sustainable financing mechanism. And then the building blocks of a particular solution will describe how that was specifically done in that particular example. So all solutions are documented in this standardized format. We currently have around 380 case studies and continuously growing with over 1,000 unique building blocks. And a solution seeker, as we call them, can then take one of these building blocks or several, recombine them with each other, of course, adapt or her own local context, and thus build on existing success. Our criteria for solutions are very broad. You can see them here on the slide, and this is deliberately so. They are designed to be very inclusive, but principally we think a solution is a tool, a method, a process, an approach. Often it's a project or a component of a project that works and that can inspire action, and it must have had an impact on biodiversity conservation. So it must be more than just an idea or something that's at a very initial stage of implementation. At least certain elements of the solution must be scalable or replicable, so they can be applied in other geographic contexts or at a broader geographic scale. And also they should address conservation and development challenges in an integrated manner. And we then have more detailed quality criteria for what constitutes a good solution description. We also have a review process for these case studies. But principally, any project or approach that meets these criteria here on the slide can qualify. And very importantly, our solutions are case-based. They're specific examples rather than general principles or concepts. Panorama is currently a partnership of 6 organizations: GIZ, IUCN, UN Environment, Great Arendal, RARE, and iFoam Organics International. GIZ, the German Development Corporation, and us, IUCN, have a leading and coordinating role. And here you can see the logos of some of the institutions that have contributed solutions, and some don't even have a logo. This is just to show that it's a very open and inclusive effort. Our role as the partners carrying this initiative is just to provide a platform for sharing and exchange. So we're acting as knowledge brokers, so to say. And the contributors include a wide variety of conservation NGOs, of course, but also government agencies, academic institutions, like here the University of the South Pacific. I love this little pen tool. Also community groups like this one from the Solomon Islands, the Larue Land Conference of Tribal Community. And we even had a municipality, the city of Stuttgart, contribute a case study. So the solutions are then being promoted in a variety of ways. We have an online platform, which is probably the backbone of Panorama, to reach the global community. And I will say a little bit more about that platform in a moment. But we also organize face-to-face exchanges between solution providers and potential replicators. And this face-to-face exchange is really crucial as well. So we have organized different types of meetings, fora, workshops, and we've also integrated solution examples into training modules to illustrate theoretical training content. Further, we promote individual solutions through various communications channels and products, including, for example, existing IUCN newsletters. We've also had dedicated publications, such as the one you see here on the slide, which had a focus on transboundary protected areas. We have a weekly social media feature, the Solution of the Week, which we often link to occasions like international days or like the European Day of Parks, which we're celebrating today. And then, as Barbara mentioned, we have a webinar series, and I'm delighted that we have an occasion to join forces with EUROPARC on that. Through this webinar series, we run sessions around particular issues around every 2 or 3 months. So this is an example of a past session we had relating to gender mainstreaming in protected area management. Now let's take a closer look at the web platform, and I really encourage you to look at it yourself as well and explore it. This is really the gateway into the Panorama case study portfolio. All solutions are published there, and you can explore them in different ways. For example, using a range of filters, or combining that with a free text search. So here's an example of the filters we have. You can also get an idea of the geographic distribution and search for solutions on a map. And of course, then you have the descriptions of the individual case studies, each of them associated with the person who is behind that particular story and who can be contacted in case you want to learn more. Core part of the description are the building blocks. So I described the format before, and you can then click on each of these building blocks to learn more about this particular component, how it was implemented, what were some enabling factors to make this work. And finally, users can contribute their own example directly through the platform, either in an abbreviated snapshot format or using the full-length case study format. This will then take you to a very intuitive, user-friendly online entry template, which takes you step by step through this format. And at the end of this, you can submit your solution as a draft, and it will be sent for review. A quick word on governance of the partnership. So I mentioned it's a joint initiative of currently 6 organizations, but it's growing, and we're continuously inviting new partners. It is funded mainly by the German Environment Ministry through different projects. In the past, we also had funding from the GEF, the Global Environment Facility. And within that joint initiative, it is then structured into what we call thematic communities. So those are kind of like focus theme of Panorama, which overlap with each other, of course. And each of these thematic communities has a coordinator, which can be one or several institutions. In the cases, it's a consortium, such as in the case of the marine and coastal theme. So the IUCN Global Protected Areas program that I work for is engaged both in the secretariat of the overall partnership as well as in the protected areas thematic community. So we have a role around identifying and promoting solutions relating to protected area management and governance. And it is now my great pleasure to introduce Azucena de la Cruz Martin. I hope I got that right. Azucena is the co-head of the Azores Department SPEA, which is the Portuguese branch of BirdLife. She graduated in environmental sciences and with postgraduate studies in public participation and citizenships. Azucena has been with the SPEA, the Portuguese Society for the Study of Birds, in the Azores since 2016. And she has developed studies on ecosystem services and management implications, and also coordinated the application of the lands of Priolo, which she will introduce now, the Lands of Priolo project to the European Charter for Sustainable Tourism. Welcome, Assina, and looking forward to your presentation.
Well, thank you very much for your introduction and for inviting us to present here. So I'm going to talk about the work that the SPEA, the Portuguese Society for the Study of Birds, which is the BirdLife partner in Portugal, that this association has been developing in the Azores, more specifically in the lands of Priolo, for the last 15 years. So basically this is Priolo. Here we have a couple in the picture. This bird is the Azores Bullfinch. It's an endemic bird from the Azores Islands that can only be found in the eastern part of San Miguel Island. So it was very, very restricted. And 15 years ago, when we started to do this conservation work, it was critically endangered. There's been a series of conservation efforts and an integrated management strategy that tried to also link the conservation of the Azores Bullfinch with the local development and the local positive socioeconomic impact in terms of ensuring the long-term maintenance of this conservation work. Just so you know where we are, I hope you can see the map. So the Azores Islands are in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and we are in the island of San Miguel, which is the biggest one of the Azores. All of them are pretty little, and we're in the eastern part, quite away from Ponta Delgada, which is the main city and which is where the airport is. This area here has a special protection area, specifically for the Priolo, and you can see the restoration work, the restoration areas that we have been working on for the last 15 years. Just to explain a little bit of what was happening here and what was happening with Priolo. Main problem, we had some problems before about the degradation of habitats, but right now our main enemy is the invasive species. The Azores Islands have a wonderful climate and many species can just start to develop. They were brought for gardens or for other uses, but nowadays, as you can see in some of the pictures, they're really, really spread, and they're a big problem for the natural habitat, which is the Azorean laurel forest, which is also the main source of food for the Azores Bullfinch. So this is quite a big problem, and I will try to explain a little bit of what we did in order to try to recover the Azores Bullfinch habitat, but also try to promote some local development in the area. So first of all, most logical first approach, we are working with ecological restoration of natural habitats, mainly in the Azores laurel forest, which is the main habitat for the Azores Bullfinch. We do so by removing chemically invasive alien species. It needs to be done with herbicides because of the high slopes in which we work. There's no possibility of doing this manually. In the laurel forest, we use soil stabilization techniques with natural engineering, which you can see here in the picture, in some areas, so that we don't have an impact on the soil and we don't lose the soil. And then we replant with native and endemic species. We also did restoration of the peatlands, not so much because of the Azores Bullfinch, but because it's another priority habitat in the area, which is very important in terms of water management and water regulation in the area. So in this peatland area, we managed the grazing cattle that was inside the peatlands that were drained for the cattle. We removed manually, in this case, because of the water, we don't use chemicals here. And then we close the drainage ditches so that we recover the water into the peatland, and we are inoculating the mosses, as you can see in the picture. We call them hamburgers. We put some hamburgers of peatland mosses that afterwards grow and fill the peatland. So that would be our first building block, ecologically restoring the natural habitats. For that, we need to produce a lot of native and endemic plants, which were initially not very, it was not very developed, the technique for producing native and endemic species. Right now, we have a production of 40,000 plants and around 160 kilograms of seeds per year, because we plant, but we also spread seeds in order to recover, especially for the herbaceous plants. And the forestry services have increased very much their production of native and endemic species also, and they give us some plants to put in the restoration areas. But we also need to monitor either the Azores Bullfinch population, so that we know how we are impacting the population, but also the restoration success. We monitor the bullfinch, vegetation development, and water, especially because of the chemicals. We have a close monitoring on the water to make sure we have no impact with that. And in case we identify some problems, we can promote correction actions if necessary. So this is the main restoration and nature conservation area. But the project also has the social component. We have since 2000, basically since the beginning, we have an environmental education program that's led for all levels of education, basic education and also informal education. And we also invite teachers, and we do teachers training in order to promote that they use our example and visit the area for their education. They adapt it to the educational curriculum, and we also give them some tools to do this work. And simultaneously, we developed an awareness raising and information program for the local and foreign visitors, with a communication strategy that aimed from social media to normal media. And we also develop general public activities so that we invite people to know what we are doing here and how we are working, and they understand better what we are doing here, because in the beginning this is quite a remote area, and it was not so easy for them to understand why suddenly there was a lot of people working in those mountains that they didn't give much value about them. So we have the Priole's Interpretation Center, and I got the date wrong. It was opened in 2007. I'm sorry for that. So it's not 2013, it was in 2007 that we opened the Priole's Interpretation Center, which was a great boost to the awareness raising and educational program strategy, because it was more coordinated and there was a specific place where the people had to contact us in terms of environmental education and getting to know the project. So, and finally, the last building block, which was the one that started later. And this had to do also with the existence services assessment that we developed in 2008, 2009. We identified some of the ecosystem services that were provided by the protected area. We use this as a communication tool to let people know that they're not only protecting a bird, but also getting some other benefits from the area. And it has been a very useful communication tool. But we also identified that sustainable tourism could be a really good tool to promote local development through conservation of the area. So in 2011, we started a participatory process to develop a strategy and action plan. As it was said before, we used the methodology of the European Charter for Sustainable Tourism, which is a methodology developed for quite a long time and managed by EUROPARC Federation. And we applied it and adapted it to our local situation. And at the present, we have been working with this tool for 6 years. We renovated last year the action plan and the strategy. And right now we have 11 entities, which are mostly public, but some are public-private entities that contribute actions to the action plan and work together. And we also have 49 touristic companies that are effective partners. They commit with some actions for a period of time in order to improve their sustainability as a company, but also to collaborate and contribute to the preservation of the protected areas. And they participate annually in those meetings in which we explain the actions that have been developed and we discuss what needs to be done next. So as an example of the 55 actions that were proposed in the first action plan, 66% were fully implemented and up to more than 80% were at least started. We now have a new plan with even more actions, 77. So finally, in terms of impact, I chose 3 very general impacts. First of all, in terms of the Azores bullfinch population, it increased in the beginning. Now we have a steady population that goes around 1,000 since 2013. We have a stable population that goes around 1,000 birds. So as I said, it was critically endangered in 2003 when we started the restoration work. Right now, it's just listed as vulnerable in the IUCN Red List. So it's quite an advance in the status of the species. It's not out of danger, but it's a good path that needs to be maintained and ensured for the longer term. We have been able to recover 350 hectares of laurel forest and 83 hectares of peatbogs in the area. And we also have been able to promote some positive socioeconomic impact in the area around the protected area. There's no people living inside the protected area, but there's a lot of little villages around our protected area. This project has an average of 21 full-time jobs, and we try to always invest locally our budget. Some things are not possible to buy in the island or in the lands of people, but we try that as much as we can, we buy it locally. And we have been able, through the project, to improve some tourist infrastructure, such as building visitor center and building some trails that are also things that stay and can be used by local companies and local entrepreneurs to develop more activities and promote this sustainable tourism. We have increased the international promotion of the Azores bullfinch, of the lands of Priolo, and even of the Azores archipelago, because the conservation of the Azores bullfinch is recognized as a good conservation story, especially because of this quick recovery of the species. And we also promote educational and scientific opportunities, improve water quality, mostly because of the peatbogs, but also in the laurel forest. It helps a lot with improving water quality and supply for the populations, because although it rains a lot in the Azores, they're very small islands, and vegetation is very important for water retention and to avoid erosion and landslide risks. So also ecosystem services developed are quite important. In terms of reflections, as it was said before too, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. Sometimes there are methodologies already in places, you just need to use them and adapt them to your reality. Not just copy them directly, understand how they would work in your reality and how you can adapt them. There are developed techniques either for ecological restoration or for social involvement that can be used and can save you a lot of time, which is important when you're living with these urgent matters of almost extinct species. It's important to learn from your mistakes. We made mistakes. We have some of the first areas that we restored that were not perfectly restored in the first place. So it is important to be a little bit humble and understand that you cannot do everything well at first. You just need to learn from your mistakes and improve your techniques until you get it right. And I think that's been another very important learning from these 15 years. It takes time. We work with 3 life program projects. which is a European Union program for the recovery of Natura 2000 areas. And even now it takes time to see the effect and to see the restoration of the areas, but also it takes time to promote and to create trust with the local population so that they understand what you're doing here and they start to value it and see the opportunities they can get from it. So both ecological restoration and the social development parts of the project are slow processes that take time and need to be maintained. So sometimes 5 years is not enough. It's just a start, and you really need to keep on the work for a longer time in order to ensure solid results. Partnerships and knowledge share are also essential. We work with the regional government, with the forestry services, and we learn from each other. Some of the techniques we've developed are now used by the forestry services. Some of the techniques they already had were techniques that we use for the restoration. So it's very important to try to promote this sharing of knowledge and working together towards the same goal. And finally, long-term maintenance is always a challenge with all the changes that are happening. It's kind of difficult, and although we have been able to do this work for 15 years, we still are not sure, and it's a continuous struggle to make sure that we can at least maintain the good work in the long term. So we are struggling with that, and if anyone has any suggestions, they will be very welcome. I hope I explained myself clearly, so thank you very much for your attention. And here we go. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Assina. It was a very inspiring presentation. I guess Marie would present now Eva. Marie, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Marie, are you there? Yes. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes. Now we can hear you.
Okay, great. I was already talking. Yeah, thanks also from my side, Assina. A really interesting case study covering a lot of aspects ranging from ecological restoration over awareness raising to tourism. And also thank you for your reflection and the point about not reinventing the wheels, probably the mantra of Panorama. So I can see we have some common insights there. If you would like to learn more about this case study, then check it out on the Panorama web platform, and you'll find a lot more detail than what Assina presented just now. It's now my pleasure to introduce our second speaker, Eva Mati-Rossian. Eva is the Deputy Director of the Foundation for the Preservation of Wildlife and Cultural Assets in Armenia. She is also the Director of the Sunchild NGO and the Sunchild International Environmental Festival. In her position at the Foundation, FPWC, for short, she is currently scheming eco-village development programs in Armenia in collaboration with the Global Eco-Village Network. Eva has a certificate on protected area management from the University of Montana in the US. So we're now moving to the very other corner of Europe, to the very other end. And Eva, over to you.
Hello.
Hello, Eva. We can hear you well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the organizers for this opportunity to speak for so many interested people all around the world. and I'm honored to present the Caucasus Wildlife Refuge, a project of the first privately protected area established in Armenia by the FPWC since 2010. So the summary, the Caucasus Wildlife Refuge started with only 400 hectares of conserved land, and now we have grown to 20,000 hectares of land, of the land conserved. And our main mission in the Caucasus Wildlife Refuge is preserving the healthy population of top predators, restoring the endangered species, and of course engaging local populations in conservation. Our partners in this from the very beginning have been IUCN Netherlands Committee and UK-based organization World Land Trust that funds similar projects all around the world. So this was the first attempt to establish a privately protected area in Armenia, because in a country with a huge post-Soviet background, where the land governance was solely the responsibility of the state and involvement of the local communities or the civil society in land management, land preservation activities, was not a common practice. In this background, establishing the privately protected area, not only in Armenia, but in the whole South Caucasus and the whole post-Soviet space, was a pioneering initiative which brought with itself a lot of challenges, but also a lot of joy that being a pioneer brings. So the main context of the whole initiative that also lies in the middle of our organization are combining conservation with sustainable development practices in the rural communities, and also behavior change, including environmental awareness raising campaigns and environmental education initiatives that are nationwide and target tens of thousands of people, including targeted groups of them, such as youth, children, and women. And coming to building blocks section, so I have already mentioned species and habitat conservation, that is in the core of the activities of the FPWC and is the core mission of the Caucasus Wildlife Refuge. We do this by securing wildlife migration corridors in the south of Armenia, that is key habitat for flagship species such as the Caucasian leopard, the one that you see on your screens at the moment, and also red-listed species such as bezoar ibex, Armenian mouflon, and common species such as the Caucasian lynx, wolves, badgers, martens, hares, etc. So the mechanism of securing the wildlife migration corridors is that we lease the land from the communities. These are communal land, and the communities own the right to manage the land and at their disposal, and they are collaborating with the FPWC, giving the land by lease, and we're lucky to record the development that in the last years the communities chose to donate their land for conservation, on already having seen all the positive impact that our work has been doing in the field, in the communities. So we lease the land from the communities for a long-term period, or the communities donate the land to us now normally for perpetuity, and we implement the management of the area by employing rangers. We have the principle of employing the rangers from the local communities only to open workplaces, and we use latest technologies for monitoring the wildlife camera traps are installed all around the area, and we have permanently manned 3 ranger stations already that implement 24/7 patrol around the area on horses, cars, or on foot as required. Excuse me. We combine conservation practice with sustainable community development, because as communities are the entities also that we work so closely with, they are the ones also that seek benefit in a way. So what we do, we have a multi-layer approach in community development field. We promote organic agriculture and fair trade principles as a way of generation self-employment or temporary income opportunities for the local communities. The photographs that you see on your screens, these colorful boxes that have dry fruit, herbal tea and honey inside them, are a production of a social enterprise established by the FPWC as a poverty reduction measure in collaboration with the European Union delegation. And this production unit is only one example of collaboration with the communities, is now employing about 7 permanent workers in the production unit, and more than 70 families benefited from it by wild herb collection and contributing in one way or another throughout the last 2 years of the project. Another way of working with the communities and making them feel the benefit of being engaged in conservation is a lot of awareness raising work that we do, combining it with practical measures such as introducing renewable energy solutions to the communities that we work in, or improving water infrastructure in vulnerable communities that have no access to drinking water or irrigation water. Another block in our system is contributing to national legislation improvement, because Armenian laws, in particular in our field on the law on fauna, has very weak points, which allows for illegal keeping of wild animals in captivity. And FPWC has worked a lot to collaborate with the Ministry of Nature Protection to lobby for amendments in the law. Besides, we have practical projects such as at the moment ongoing bear rescue project, which not only allows us to save the bear from horrible conditions. They are kept in like fuel stations or restaurants as pets, and no proper conditions are kept for this, and we are saving them and doing a huge information campaign that is now worldwide. We are doing it in collaboration with the International Animal Rescue to change the behavior, and having started more than 1 year ago, we are now at a place that a lot of attitude changed in this direction, and also the law package of amendments is being elaborated at the moment, and we're expecting to have it adopted already this year. Another contribution that we did in this field was research on wildlife trafficking, because Armenia is considered to be a wildlife trafficking transit zone, and we work with the government, also with the European Union in their initiatives of GSP Plus, to monitor the convention's implementation, in particular, like CITES in this case, also the CBD convention. And of course, coming to the most important part, the law on protected areas does not allow for having a privately protected area as a separate category, which is another challenge that we have faced. And we are working with the Ministry of Environment to also have that amendment input in it. We were co-authors of motion 34 at the IUCN World Congress in 2016 on privately protected areas, which passed unanimously in the Congress and was promoting recognition and support to the privately protected areas and similar initiatives such as community conserved areas in the countries like Armenia. Also, I know that Latin America faces this issue with the same difficulties that we do. Another block in our case is, of course, empowering people for positive change, because contributing to the communities economically or raising awareness just is not enough. And in this block in particular, we have a target on youth and children. We have been working since 2006 in environmental education field, establishing the first environmental education network in Armenia, including thousands of children there. And we're proud to record the statistics that all the children that have passed through our Eco Club curricula, most of them have chosen their career inspired by the environment and conservation. They became like eco-architects or biochemists or any similar, and many of them are employed now with the FPWC. They are from rural regions from all over Armenia, and most of them are happily volunteering for all the events that FPWC has throughout the year. So about the impact, throughout our work, we combine the 4 dimensions of sustainability. It was mentioned during my introduction that we're currently working on eco-village strategy development in Armenia, and we're focal point of the global eco-village network. And in collaboration with them, we're developing, localizing eco-village specific solutions for Armenia. Why I referred to it, because it's also lying in the main core of the eco-village principle, very close to also ICCA or Indigenous and Community Conserved Areas principle, combining 4 dimensions of sustainability to have a holistic impact. So ecology or environment, and our direct impact in this is like 20,000 hectares of protected areas, securing wildlife migration corridors, important bird and biodiversity areas, and this area is growing. And drastic and continuous increase in wildlife populations numbers, because when we started with our 400 hectares protected land around 8 years ago, the wildlife was nearly non-existent in this area because of wide practice of poaching, illegal hunting, because our privately protected area is starting just from the buffer zone of the biggest state nature reserve in Armenia. So an economic segment is nonetheless important, because like since 2014 we have contributed to more than 55 communities with improved infrastructure in renewable energy and water. and dozens of workplaces and income opportunities were created for the rural population, having evaluated their social background and choosing the most vulnerable ones. Society has benefited from our activities. I have mentioned about the Eco Club network that we have. So we have about 2,000 young people trained in the Eco Club system, and many of them have become also local leaders, and many of them are serving as volunteers and conservationists and junior rangers in the protected area adjacency. And culture is an inseparable segment of this. Also, the European Cultural Heritage Year was mentioned, and I like really the motto of it. So we were combining culture always in our conservation efforts to through festivals, through environmental art initiatives, building environmental campaigns with a reach out like up to 500,000 people, as the whole local media was involved, highlighting these informational campaigns widely, and also many of them were highlighted internationally. Sunchild International Environmental Festival was one of the big awareness raising campaigns that we have been implementing since 2007. This is it in brief, and about reflections. What I personally, and I think more or less all of our team, has learned through the years of our work is that constructive approach and proactiveness in collaboration is very important, as opposed to like demonstrated criticism, which is also very important. Like environmental activism is very important, that it is a change-making tool very often, but collaboration with entities such as government, with entities such as partner NGOs, are a tool that make the whole work more comprehensive, holistic, and sustainable. Another lesson is that sustainability starts with a sense of compassion. Having conservation as our mission and our aim, we had also real compassion for the rural communities that we have been collaborating with. We have been very consistent in identifying specific needs in each and every community that we have been working with. And we have done a lot of work on a personal level, approaching people, entering families, talking to children. And this compassion is returning like a boomerang, because they have returned to us by being really compassionate about conservation now, and proving that compassion by concrete actions. And another lesson learned is that as much as we work on awareness raising, and as many people we involve in the process, children and youth are the most grateful audience, and the ones that take the message and become bearers of it. So they are really very strong and very genuine ambassadors for the future. And our experience showed that all the message that we delivered to them, they have taken, and now they are stewards themselves, protecting and advocating for conservation. Of course, there are many other lessons learned, but as we have a time limit, I will finish with this. Thank you very much for listening, and I will be happy to answer your questions. Our solution is currently under review, but hopefully will be published already tomorrow, so you can also read all the details about our success story on Panorama. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Eva, for this fantastic presentation and very impressive work from Armenia with impact well beyond one particular site, but impact on national legislation as well, and really pioneering work for the region, an example of how social development can be integrated with conservation, but also in itself, this is a great example of building on what works elsewhere with the eco-village approach or the ICCA's model and adapting this to a local context. So we now have some time to address fantastic questions that have been submitted, and I'm going to hand over to Barbara to moderate this.
Okay, thank you very much, Marie, and thank you very much, Assina and Eva, for your presentations. Thank you also to all the participants for the questions. You can still write down questions, but please don't forget to address them to either Eva or Assina, or even to Marie if you have any question you would like to have an answer from Marie. So, Assina, I will start with you with a question from Luke Edwards. Could you please tell us how is the management of the area financed? How are you able to get funds for the conservation projects you are implemented?
Hello. Yes, to the moment it's being financed by the LIFE program of the European Union with co-financement by the regional government. Okay, most of the work that we have been developing has been possible thanks to the contribution of the European Union. And that's one of the reasons that I was saying long-term maintenance is always a challenge. If projects are for 5 years, tops, so we are always trying to find new tools. We do have some return from the work that we have been doing, but it is not enough so far to ensure an adequate maintenance of the area. It gets cheaper. If we do a good work in the restoration, maintenance gets a lot cheaper and easier because the natural vegetation protects the re-entrance of the invasive species. However, it's necessary to, every 5-6 years at least, do some maintenance in the already restored areas to make sure that we don't have reinvasion, because the problem of invasive species is not only in our protected area, it's a big problem in all the area of San Miguel. So yeah, that's basically how we finance it and the problems we have with the financement, which are already a challenge that we are trying to overcome.
And are you also trying to find mechanisms through sustainable tourism to have some funds directed to nature conservation, Assina?
We are trying. So far we have this partnership, and some of the companies actually contribute with their little contributions. But we need to understand that most of the companies that we work with are very small companies, familiar companies. So they can contribute and they're willing to contribute, and sometimes they do volunteer work, or they invite tourists to do volunteer work, or they even contribute financially to the conservation, but their capability will not be enough to ensure long-term maintenance. We cannot think so far that it's going to be the tourist companies that are going to finance the work. So far, we don't know in the future if some mechanism can be stated in a wider way, and we can find this solution. But so far, it's not enough.
Yeah, not the tour operators themselves, but basically, perhaps a visitor paying scheme could also be a possibility.
Exactly. Yeah, that could be a solution, and this can be think, but it needs to be a solution that is thought as the autonomous region policy.
Exactly. This more or less fades into the question made by Peter Trokos for you. And he wrote, how high do you judge the role of local tour operators to make the project a success? So you mentioned they are involved in volunteer activities, but they are also ambassadors and supporters of the measures?
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. They're ambassadors. They believe in the project, and they're a very useful support base for us, because they understood that the conservation and the maintenance of the area is very important for them too. So they also do kind of help us do the lobby that this needs to be maintained and that this is important. So apart from their contribution to the protected area, they're also very interested and very involved in ensuring that we can continue the work and can maintain the work that we've been doing.
Okay, thank you very much, Assina. I will get back to you with some questions about invasive species. But now I would like to pass it on to Eva and to ask you, Eva, if it's about the creation and the recognition of your protected area. Again, a question by Peter. Could the private nature reserve also get a governmental status?
Sorry, your voice was cut just in the middle. Could you please repeat the question?
Sure. I was asking if your protected area could become could have a governmental status, could have a legal protection. Eva, could you hear me?
You mean to become a governmentally accepted buffer zone of the state protected area? I can read this question. Is that the question?
It was before that, if the private nature reserve also gets a governmental status.
Okay. No, this is the one thing that I mentioned as one of the challenges that we are facing, that we want to have the status of privately protected area be included in the national legislation, and not only the status of the privately protected area, but community conserved area, community managed areas, like the private initiatives, saying private, like managed by the local civil society organizations or the communities itself, so that the communities or NGOs are empowered to contribute to the conservation, as opposed to making it solely the responsibility and monopoly in a way of the government, because this is, as I'm sure you know, a very much accepted practice in Europe, in the US, and it proves itself as being a huge benefit for conservation as a whole picture. But at the moment, we as a post-Soviet area and many countries like Armenia, and I've also mentioned, I know that they have the same issue in Latin America, the trend of privately protected areas or community conserved areas is growing. And in many places, like in Armenia, I should mention that we do have the very positive attitude by the government, but we need, and we work together with our partners as well, to have it firmly strengthened on paper and be encarved in the legislation.
Okay, thank you, Eva. So going to the second question of Peter, it could not be governmentally accepted as part of the buffer zone of the state protected area, or could it? Eva?
Hello?
Yes, could you hear the second question?
Yeah, your voice was cut again, but this one was governmentally accepted part of the buffer zone of the state protected area. Is that the question?
Yes.
Yeah. Factually, we are in a status of having the buffer zone of the state protected area. So because once the border of the state nature reserve ends, our area is starting. So in practice, this is a buffer zone of the state protected area, and our government recognizes it, because our government recognizes the existence of the Caucasus Wildlife Refuge as a conservation initiative. But still, this is something that we need to have documented on a legal field.
Okay, thank you very much, Eva. Meanwhile, if anyone has any other question for Eva, please write it down. And in the meantime, I will ask Assina something about invasive species. So we have a question here from Emma, and she's asking if the invasive species are creating a problem with other endemics. Could you please elaborate a bit on what species in São Miguel?
Hi, okay, I was answering with the audio. Yes, there are big problems with all the endemic plants and even some endemic arthropods and so on. So invasive alien species are a big problem in the Azores Islands, in all of the islands. I could say San Miguel is probably the one with the biggest problem, but all the islands have some problems with this. And it is not only about the ever. It's a problem that involves all biodiversity. These invasive species are spreading very quickly. They've been spreading for many years, and right now many of the natural habitats are almost lost to invasive species. I could then enter into details, but into the laurel forest we have different high altitude levels. So the lower areas are basically dominated by invasive species. The higher areas are a little bit more preserved. So it is not only a problem of the Azores bullfinch, it's a problem for all biodiversity in the Azores.
Okay, thank you, Assina. And a question from Stefania. Well, you mentioned that you are using chemical methods to remove invasive species. Although we know this is a bit controversial, could you give us your opinion about that, and what products are you using, and how can you measure the impact of the chemical methods you are using?
Yes, we are aware that it is a controversial question, and our position is that it needs to be used only if necessary, only in the smallest amount possible. So we try to, in our case, if we were only to cut the invasive species, we will be doing nothing. They would just sprout and be even stronger. So it's not a valid technique. It's not something we can do. So we cannot remove the roots. That would be the other solution, because we have very high slopes and we would be producing very much erosion. And that could be a problem for the habitat, but also a risk for the people. So we need to use the herbicides if we want to have some success in the removal of invasive species. What we do is we use the smallest amount of product possible. So we test it before, and we know exactly how low we can go, and it still is effective. And we also do the work plant by plant with local application. So we don't use it generally. We have a field team of 15 people that go cut the invasive species and put the product on the plants. So it's very, very specific. As an example, I can say that with the monitoring of the vegetation, we have a 99% of success in removal of invasive alien species, and we only get 1% of loss of endemic species in the same area. So we kill the invasive species, we don't even affect the endemic ones, and this 1% of loss that actually happens has more to do with the trampling of the field team while they go to the plants to remove the invasive species than with the herbicide. So it has to do with the technique you use, and you need to have a very close monitoring. We also, as I said, we monitor the water, and we monitor the water to make sure that there are no traces of the herbicide or the products we use in the water. We only have one situation in which we had a little trace, and it was very, very below the level of risk. It was just a little small trace, and since then, this was in 2008, we have never had that problem again. So it was a punctual test, and it was really, really low, and we just took the solution so that it didn't happen anymore. So I guess if you want to protect biodiversity, and in this case, it is important for the Azores biodiversity that we do something about invasive species. And there's no other solution. You just need to use the safest techniques and make sure you don't have any other impact with that. That's our position on this.
Okay, that's very impressive, Assina, that you're able to remove the species without affecting the native species. So thank you for that, Assina. I will now make the last question to Eva. Eva, there is a question about large carnivores. So how do you manage the conflicts between the large carnivores and farmers and shepherds or cattle producers?
We do have the issue of human-wildlife conflict in our area. Wolves and bears are the two large carnivores that the farmers and shepherds are mostly affected by, because the big cats, the leopard is very elusive, and besides we only have about 9 individuals left in Armenia. So we have been working with the farmers, also with the government about this issue, because only up to last year we had this very sad practice of having the wolves killed by the law, so which resulted in very bad experiences, or especially on the background that since decades there hasn't been made any proper monitoring and evaluation of the wolf population in Armenia. As regards our practical work with the farmers and shepherds, we have been working with our partners, in particular our local corporate partner, which is the major telecommunications operator in Armenia, to introduce to the farmers and donate to them as an experimental solution these electric fences for protecting their farms or their stock from the predators. This said, I should also mention that our area, the south of Armenia, doesn't have the highest percentage of cases of human-wildlife conflict. We face it more in the north. We're still working in it. We had specialists, wolf specialists in particular, invited from the Canada, who implemented a monitoring in our protected area, and we hope that it will have continuation to replicate this monitoring practice in a larger area. Thanks to the effort of the conservationist community in Armenia and their dialogue with the Ministry of Nature Protection, the practice of killing the wolves has stopped, because it was really irregulated. So there was some relative number, like 500 wolves can be killed during the year, but there was no proper license mechanisms for giving license to hunters for the wolves, or as I said, and there was no proper preliminary monitoring and evaluation practice to understand if this is at all an allowable number to be killed of the wolves, not to face the sad reality of the yellows, for instance, where the wolves were eliminated. So we're still working in it. The solution of using electric fences has different approaches by the farmers. Some really like it. Some find it not very productive. But I could say that we have a positive development in this regard, and hopefully our collaboration, our and our partners' collaboration with the government will bring to a place where we have a strong policy shaped to apply a sustainable solution for this problem.
Okay, thank you very much, Eva. It's very interesting the work you're doing also with the shepherds, providing them fences and guarding dogs. That's also one of the main measures being implemented in other countries in Europe.
And if I may, as we are talking about farmers and shepherds, just to add to my presentation and our collaboration with them, it doesn't have to do with the question directly, but it has to do with our protected area management mechanism, because we have some zonings for sustainable farming, for sustainable grazing in our protected area. And the farmers who previously had to pay for having their stock grazing in these areas have now free access, because we grant them free access to these zones that were identified as proper for sustainable grazing or sustainable farming. And they, by having this free access, they also become our agents and our volunteers in this conserved area. If they notice any illegal activity in their surrounding, they are one of the first also to contact us and to report about it, because they already feel themselves as part of the team and part of the contributors to the initiative.
Yeah, that's very impressive. Yes, to engage them properly. Well, Eva, thank you very much. Assina, thank you also very much for your answers. We have no more questions, and we are actually a bit late already. I would just like to conclude giving an overview of the case studies we have heard today. We have heard how SPEA is protecting the Azores Bullfinch through an holistic approach involving ecological restoration, but also monitoring the impact and especially bringing socio-economical benefits. The same with the case study that Eva presented with FPWC working directly with the community. This example that Eva just said about involving farmers and making them and cattle producers and giving them the ownership almost of the land so that they feel the ambassadors and the protectors of the land. This is absolutely crucial. And these two case studies are quite inspiring. I would also like to highlight that both case studies are actually implemented by non-governmental organizations. So these two NGOs in Portugal and Armenia are actually being the active actors involving the governmental organizations and then trying to work together with the local communities to enhance social and economical benefits, but also working for a positive change, as Eva mentioned, and doing environmental education activities. So I find this was a great way to celebrate our European Day of Parks today. It was somehow related with cultural heritage, but it's mainly related to people involvement for nature conservation. So once more, thank you very much, Assina and Eva, and thank you also very much, Marie, for having had this opportunity to come together and organize EUROPARC and PANORAMA webinar. I hope you have all enjoyed the webinar as well. Thank you all for your participation and for your questions. All the presentations and the recordings will be available tomorrow on our website, but you also receive it on your email. And meanwhile, I wish you a wonderful European Day of Parks, and do go to our website to find out an activity close to you. So there are activities all over Europe and also outside of Europe. So feel free to go out, explore a protected area, and celebrate the important role of parks in Europe. Thank you very, very much, and see you in the next EUROPARC webinar. Goodbye.